In this video, we'll explore the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. These books may be summarized as follows. God, on his part, stood ready to establish and affirm the kings of Israel, but it was conditional. He would only do so long as they pursued him and his ordinances wholeheartedly. Else their rule would meet demise, either sooner or later. We'll begin by outlining the books themselves, and then we'll review some historical, literary, and theological features. By and large, the first 11 chapters of 1 Kings are devoted to Solomon's monarchy, how it was that he was established as successor to David. It wasn't automatic, as you'll recall from your reading. Then proceeding to his building of the temple, also his own palace, and then the downfall of his own reign towards the end as it deteriorated. Following David, then, we come to his son and successor Rehoboam, and it was under Rehoboam that Israel divided into two kingdoms. There was the division to the north, following Jeroboam the first, and then Rehoboam retaining control over largely Judah in the south. That divided kingdom status will continue on into 2 Kings. So it's the balance of Israelite history that's characterized by the division that took place right at the end, right following Solomon's rule. So we find there under B1, son Rehoboam loses the kingdom, loses the United Kingdom, retains only the south. Jeroboam breaks off and begins the northern kingdom, and that's still 1 Kings 12. Beginning with 1 Kings 16, we come to one of the major sequential monarchies within the northern kingdom. It was begun by King Omri of northern kingdom of Israel, and continued on for several kings without there being someone usurping the power from outside the family. For this reason, it's called a dynasty, the Omride dynasty, in honor of its founder. Perhaps the most illustrious member of that was King Ahab, again, northern Israel. King Ahab, he married Jezebel. Interfacing with Ahab and representing God's agenda against a wicked king then was the prophet Elijah. Memorable in this series of events is the showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, which took place at Mount Carmel. A little later on, we'll locate that with some maps and photos. Ahab was a wicked king. One of the indications of that was his abuse of power in seizing Naboth's vineyard, having him killed in the process. A very colorful story occurs in 1 Kings 22, when Ahab, in league with the king of southern Israel, proposes to take on some outside enemies in this alliance. When the king of southern Israel asks for a prophetic oracle, whether or not this is going to please God, Ahab trots out several of his false prophets. The southern Israel king protests, saying, "Is there not a true prophet of God?" He can see right through these yes men that Ahab brings in. And Ahab says, "Well, yes, there is one, but he never says anything positive about me, so I don't like to listen to him. His name is Micaiah." The southern Israel king insists, and so Micaiah comes in, and there's a very colorful story about God's agenda to bring down Ahab in battle, to kill him in battle. And Micaiah uses some sarcasm to reveal this divine agenda, which does in fact take place. As Elijah reaches the conclusion of his ministry, then he's replaced along about 2 Kings 2 through 8 with Elisha, And Elisha's ministry then takes off, and various miracles are recorded, which help attest the authorization of Elisha to serve in the stead of his very famous predecessor, Elijah. One of the prophecies that comes out of the prophetic ministry has to do with Jehu bringing the Omride dynasty to a bloody end. So Jehu will come from outside the Omride family and execute God's judgment against them. In the process, incidentally, he will also kill the king of southern Israel, Ahaziah, in addition to killing the king of northern Israel. And that figure, Ahaziah, will die at Megiddo, as will a later southern Israel king, Josiah. When we come to 2 Kings 11, we're introduced to one of the good kings of southern Israel, Joash. One of the evidences of his good rule is the fact that he undertook to repair the temple. In 2 Kings 13, Elisha, the second in that Elijah-Elisha sequence, Elisha dies, and that voice then becomes silent, that voice on God's behalf. In 2 Kings 14, we have an episode where the northern kingdom punishes the south. So you might call that a civil war. And the northern kingdom becomes very strong. And that is indicated as a fulfillment of prophecy of a particular prophet whose name is given to us as Jonah. And so this could very reasonably fit with the Jonah of the book of Jonah, although there are some Bible scholars who question that link. Taken at face value, it seems like a reasonable inference. Point 7 on the screen then in the book outline of 1st and 2nd Kings brings us to a very significant coalition. And here's what happened. The king of northern Israel, Pekah, wanted to gain authority over southern Israel. He doesn't feel he can do this in his own strength, so he reaches out to Syria. And this has come to be known as the Syro-Ephraimite coalition. Ephraim, that would be the most dominant tribe of northern Israel, and sometimes we just call it Ephraim in order to characterize that northern region. So when we say Ephraimite, we're saying northern Israel. The Syro-Ephraimite coalition then was instigated as the idea of the northern Israelite king Pekah. On the throne in the south is Ahaz, King Ahaz. This causes great distress to Ahaz, and in fact it's recorded in Isaiah. Isaiah is ministering contemporaneous with this era, and God gives Isaiah an oracle of reassurance to say, don't worry about that threat, King Ahaz, the threat from your northern Israel cousins, as it were, together reinforced with the Syrians. Don't worry about that. You can read it in 2 Kings 16 and then parallel material in Isaiah 7 and 8. Well, when we come to 721, this is when the lights go out for northern Israel. It will be the Assyrian Shalmaneser who brings down northern Israel in one of his campaigns coming out from the east. It's a 3-year siege of the capital, northern Israel, Samaria. Incidentally, 721, the fall of the northern kingdom with the fall of Samaria, its capital. This is a very valuable little fact to memorize, a historic date to memorize, 721, northern Israel at the hands of the Assyrians. A little later, we'll come to the evaluation of the writer of 2 Kings, explaining why it was that northern Israel fell. It's a very explicit theologizing provided to us in 2 Kings 17, beginning with verse 17. So at this point, northern Israel is no more. They have been deported, and a a map that we'll show a little bit later will show the direction, the flow of people. They were deported and dispersed by the Assyrians, and other populations that the Assyrians had conquered then were imported, were moved forcibly into Israel, the northern Israel region. When we come to 2 Kings 18, we encounter another good king in southern Israel by the name of Hezekiah. Despite his overall upright rule, he will become a victim of Sennacherib the Assyrian. He is not killed by Sennacherib, but he does experience a siege of Jerusalem. Again, a little later on, we'll show you a map that shows the direction of travel of the Assyrian campaign. In order to reach Jerusalem, the Assyrian first takes out Lachish. The Assyrian ruler's name is Sennacherib, and the siege and defeat of Lachish, which was a strongly fortified city with both militarily, with forces, armament, defenses, and also a food supply reserve. It was a very devastating blow for Israel that this outlying town, which was positioned as a security to make it harder for enemies to get to Jerusalem. When Lachish fell, it was just devastating. Then Sennacherib moves on to besiege Jerusalem, but he is not successful. And here again, you can see a case where an account in Kings is paralleled. In fact, there's a lot of verbatim reporting in Isaiah 36 and 37. A little later, we'll show you a prism record, a column with the cuneiform record where Sennacherib told from his point of view. He talks about caging up Hezekiah in Hezekiah's capital, Jerusalem, so they could not get out. What's very noteworthy there is he doesn't say that he squashed the cage, and in fact that is what happened. He caged him up, and then God miraculously intervened, and the siege was lifted. Subsequent to this, Hezekiah falls ill, and we have that account in Kings and also in Isaiah, as you see. In 2 Kings 21, we're introduced to another king. Again, it's all southern kingdom of Israel from this point forward, Judah. His name is Manasseh. His record of atrocities is so significant that ultimately, as you see the reference here in 2 Kings 24:4, a few chapters later, ultimately the fault for the collapse of southern Israel will be laid at the feet of Manasseh. Although by that time he is dead, they look back and say, it was because Manasseh behaved so vilely that God eventually had to disband Judah and send them into Babylonian exile. Southern kingdom, the king Josiah is, again, like Hezekiah, a good king. Rather remarkable because he comes to the throne so young. So there are regents, people helping him lead the land, obviously, when he is such a young child. One of the very noteworthy acts that he engages in is to renew the covenant nationwide. He calls on everyone to rededicate themselves to God. Another event that takes place in his reign, not noted on the outline here, is the discovery of the Book of the Law within the temple during a period of renovation of the temple, doing repairs. Scholars feel this probably was the language, the document of Deuteronomy. And now, if you'll recall some theories about authorship of Deuteronomy, you will remember that in the view of some scholars, they feel that Deuteronomy was actually written at this time during the reign of Josiah, and then purported to be coming from Moses to have that sort of authority. This is a theory that has gained a lot of support, although I personally don't find this a convincing theory. There are elements within the content of Deuteronomy that don't seem like they would fit an authorship at this period of time. But again, that belongs to an earlier discussion that we've already had relative to the dating and authorship of the Pentateuch. Just want to point out that here we are now at southern king of Israel, Josiah, and it's during his reign that we have this account of the discovery of this document. It causes the leaders of Israel to shake in their boots because the behavior that the nation has been engaged in, they see now, is going to cause their downfall. They validate it to see whether or not, in fact, things are as serious as they fear. They validate it by going to a woman who is a prophet. Her name is Huldah. We even know what district of Jerusalem at that time she lived in, and she says, yes, you're right. Your suspicions were right. We are in deep, deep trouble because the way we've been behaving. This document shows that God's judgment must eventually come to us. Bottom of the screen here, you see item 11C, the end of the King Josiah, Pharaoh Necho. He is killed at Megiddo. That is, Josiah is killed at Megiddo. This was a tragic, tragic event. Pharaoh Necho was not interested in establishing his rule over Israel. He was simply in transit. He was taking the coastal route to get up to Carchemish because he was interested in helping another international ally, the Assyrians, rebuff the attempts of the up-and-coming Babylonian Empire to unseat the Assyrians. Somehow, evidently, the Egyptians liked an enemy they knew, the Assyrians, better than an enemy they didn't know, the Babylonians. So he was going all the way through Palestine, up the coast to Carchemish on the Euphrates, that would be north of Israel, in order to support his allies, the Assyrians. Well, Josiah sees him trespassing through Israel and doesn't take kindly to this and intercepts Pharaoh Necho, and Necho on the way to Carchemish just dispatches, that is, kills Josiah in the process. Josiah will die on Mount Megiddo, incidentally, and we'll show you a bit more information about Megiddo. As we approach the end of the 1st and 2nd Kings sequence, then, we come to point 12, and at this slice of the history of southern Israel, Pharaoh has just killed the king of southern Israel, Josiah. He takes control of the country at that time and sets up Jehoiakim. There is actually a successor to Josiah that reigns for something like 3 months. But then swiftly Pharaoh says, no, I'm not interested in him being your ruler. I'm going to set up a ruler. It will still be someone from the Davidic line, but it's someone who is named and set up by Pharaoh. Jehoiakim is that individual. Unfortunate for Egypt, the Babylonians come along and they deprive Egypt of their sovereignty over Israel pretty quickly. So the Egyptian hegemony over Israel is not very, that does not span a long period of time. Babylonians come in. Incidentally, it'll be at this time, 605, that Daniel will be taken into exile by the Babylonians. Point 13, we have Babylonian Nebuchadnezzar, sometimes spelled or pronounced Nebuchadrezzar, same individual. He will lay siege to Jerusalem and take a successor to Jehoiakim, take his successor Jehoiakim into exile. And with him, incidentally, will go Ezekiel. So if you've wondered, on the one hand, when did Daniel wind up in Babylon? Well, it was 605 during a Babylonian grab of personnel out of Egypt, out of Israel. And in the case of Ezekiel, who also operates, his ministry is in Babylonia, he found himself in Babylon in 587 as part of the group that included his king, southern king Jehoiakim. When we come to 2 Kings 25, then, it's the end of Israel as a monarchy, Judah more properly as a monarchy. This comes in 586. Some books will list it as 587, after an 18-month siege by the Babylonians. The last king of Judah is Zedekiah. The Babylonians will capture and kill him. He escapes, but then they chase after him as he's heading down towards the Jordan Valley, and he's executed. The book ends with a bit of good news, however, backing up one king to Jehoiakim. The writer of 2 Kings points out that although Jehoiakim is a captive in Babylon, he is brought out of prison by a Babylonian ruler and given some measure of freedom. He's not sent back to Israel, but he does have some freedoms there within Babylon. And that's a little glimmer of hope against the backdrop of the deep despair of the fall of first northern Israel, 721, to the Assyrians, and then southern Israel, 586, to the Babylonians.